Good morning. This is Rich Sierra with Business SOS. I'm president of the Florida Small Business Legal Center. Today this is episode number 20 of Business SOS. I'm very excited. We started this a few months ago. And thank you for listening to the podcast and watching the YouTube channel. Today, I actually have a friend with me, Jeff Traumberg. He's a live studio audience. Thank you for joining, Jeff.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Okay, hope you like it. And I come back to see us. Maybe you can be a guest in the show sometime.
I would absolutely love that.
That would be awesome. So today's the final installment of the franchise series. We started this about 3 to 4 weeks ago, and I think franchises are very important. There are thousands of franchises throughout the United States, and many business owners look at franchising as a way to begin their business journey. And it's a great way to get in, but also there's some caveats to that. And in my experience, when people come to my office, as I mentioned to you before, is when things go wrong. And a lot of times things go wrong when people buy a franchise because they do not read the documents, they do not understand them, they go into the business venture with great expectations or great hope, but they do not read the fine print, and more importantly, they do not seek the legal advice that they should have had before entering into the franchise. See, my role is not to get you out of the franchise or the purchase. My role is to educate you and tell you this is what you're getting into, and it is up to you whether or not you want to pursue it or not. But at the very least, you should know all the challenges that you will face along the way in purchasing the franchise, purchasing a business. Ultimately, it's up to you. So in this franchise series, I began to tell you in the first installment things to consider when you look into a franchise, and I didn't go into specific documents. It's basically what I consider common sense approaches to really understanding what a franchise is and really the potential landmines you're going to encounter in negotiating the franchise fee, if there's negotiable at all, the territory, and things that there's not really in the franchise disclosure document. The second part, I went into the FDD in more detail, and I went through some specific items that you need to pay attention in the franchise disclosure document. What is the FDD? And basically the 23 required disclosures that they have to give you pursuant to the Federal Trade Commission before you purchase a franchise. And remember, these are minimum requirements. They're not going to give you everything. They give you what is required by law. And then today, and I did that in 2 podcasts. I went into the FDD Part 1, FDD Part 2. Today, I'm not going to go into that. Actually, this is FDD Part 3 because today we're going to talk about the franchise agreement. And what I did, from my legal library, I downloaded a sample franchise agreement. It's not about any particular franchise. In this particular case, it's a restaurant franchise, sample franchise agreement. And I'm going to talk about that in more detail, just to kind of give you an idea of what to expect. You're not going to become an expert on franchise agreements with this podcast, but you at least have an understanding about when you look at one, say, okay, you know what, I need to pay attention to these following items. Before I start, I want to invite you to participate in the show. If you have a legal question that you have that you'd like me to address at any time in the podcast, you can email me at rich@richsierra.com, and send me your legal question. If I select your question to address in the podcast, I'll send you an autographed copy of my book, Business SOS, 8 Common Legal Mistakes Business Owners Make and How to Avoid Them. So let's go into the franchise agreement. One of the most important documents you're going to sign with a franchisor, there are 2 of them. One of them is the acknowledgement that you received the FDD. That's a receipt that you received it, and you were given 14 days to review the FDD. That's number 1. Number 2, the franchise agreement really is going to be governing the relationship that you have with the franchisor. This is an extremely important document. In fact, the sample that I got has about 30 pages long, and not including the appendixes. So it is a very complex document. It is written by attorneys. So my recommendation that if you're looking to buy a franchise, you need to seek the advice of an attorney who understands franchise agreements. Don't go it alone. Whether you're buying a business or a franchise, my recommendation, do not do this by yourself. Get the proper legal advice, get the proper financial advice, so that way I have a more level playing field in understanding what you're getting into. So in this franchise agreement, one of the things that they look at is who's going to be the control person in that franchise, meaning that the franchisor want to find out if you're going to buy a franchise, have somebody else run it, that is fine, but they want you to designate who's going to be managing that franchise, and that individual, if it's not an owner, will have to sign some documents regarding non-disclosure, confidentiality, but you got to designate somebody who's going to be that individual. And that's more in the definitions. In this particular example, control person means the individual who has the authority to and does in fact actively direct your business affairs in regards to the franchise and are responsible for overseeing the general management of the day-to-day operations of the franchise and has authority to sign on behalf of all contracts and commercial documents. Most likely, if you're buying the franchise, you'll be that control person. So it's important to know that. You need to understand what the gross sales definition is in your franchise. Because the gross sales will determine how they're going to collect their royalties. So anything that you sell in that franchise, whether it's gift cards, any money coming in that franchise, most likely will be gross sales. So we talked about royalties before, and in this case, you will have to pay for every dollar that comes in, you'll have to pay a percentage to royalties. Could be 5% in some cases, 10% of those gross sales. You also have to most likely pay an advertising fee, where there is a 1%, 3% advertising fee that you have to spend. Plus, you have a national advertising fee as well that they most likely will charge you. So you have to calculate that, understanding what the gross sales definition is. What can you sell in the franchise? In this particular case, you have menu items, meaning that you can only sell these specific items through this franchise. And I'm looking at a restaurant franchise agreement, an example of it. So you're not going to be able to deviate from the product line that they're asking you that you're required to sell, because it is a franchise. You're basically signing up to their system. Who's going to be the owner in the franchise? In some cases, I have clients saying, well, I'm going to create an LLC for the franchise. I'm going to have put in a trust. We saw a different conversation altogether. But it doesn't matter. You can have an LLC, a corporation own the franchise. You will be guaranteeing that franchise personally, for the most part. So with maybe very few exceptions, if you're basically buying a franchise, very likely you will be the owner. You have to basically say who's going to be owning the franchise, and also you got to state you will basically have a personal guarantee on the performance in the franchise and the obligations. Let's talk about trademark licensing, and this is very important. They're going to grant you the license to use their trademark, meaning that you will be able to use their trademark exactly the way they ask you to use it. You're not going to be able to use your own mark. You're not going to be able to use any variations of it. You're not going to be able to change any of the marks. They'll give you a license to use the mark the way they want you to use it, and they authorize you to use it. So you cannot deviate from that format, and that's a very important component of the franchise system. You're getting their brand name, you're getting their trademark, you're getting their system, you're getting the way they have a system of operation, and that's what you're buying. So that's part of the franchise agreement. Your territory, sometimes they call it designated area. This, as I mentioned to you in a prior episode, and I probably mentioned in most of the episodes, the designation of the territory is one of the very important aspects you will negotiate in your franchise, things you have some control over. If you're about to buy a restaurant franchise like we have here in this example, you want to find out, okay, what is the territory that I will be purchasing? What is my protected territory? That meaning that there's nobody else is going to have another franchise of this particular company within, whether it's a 5-mile radius, whether it's a 10-mile radius. The designation of the territory is very important because they'll protect your territory. They'll guarantee that they're not going to sell another franchise within that radius, but at the same time, you will have to perform in order to be able to maintain that territory. So you need to understand that, and we talked about, perhaps in pretty much in every episode, determining how the territory, or understanding how the territory is determined by the franchisor is extremely important. You need to know whether it's the household income, average household income of that territory, whether the customers that you're about to sell to have the discretionary income to go to your restaurant in this case. So you need to understand that, and that's something you can negotiate, because you can say, you know what, maybe I don't like this territory, but I like this one if it's available. But it's up to you to do the due diligence to understand which territory will be more financially beneficial to you and more profitable. They'll sell you a territory that's available, but it is up to you to make the determination whether that is the territory that you want to buy. Opening. For the most part, when you sign, and first you still put a franchise fee, and I told you before that in most cases you will have required to pay a franchise fee before you before you select a location where you're going to be operating, which is kind of a pet peeve of mine, that you basically, it's sight unseen in a sense. Say you pay $20,000 on a franchise fee. This is going to be your territory, whether it's a 5-mile radius, say it's in Boca, for example, and Boca is a fairly large city, but you have not selected a location yet, and the franchise fee is not refundable. And I mentioned before that if you're going to pay a franchise fee, to the extent that you can negotiate this, say, listen, if I don't find a location that is acceptable to me, or a lease agreement that is acceptable to me, because you're going to want paying for this lease, then the franchise fee is fully refundable. In some cases, they may agree to it. Some cases, they may not. If you do not ask for it, I guarantee you they're not going to offer that to you. So you will basically by the franchise agreement, you have the territory, and then you have to go ahead and find a location in order to operate. And that's basically becomes the challenge. You're already basically now committed to this franchise. You got to find a lease. Now, the location has to be approved by the franchisor. So that's another caveat here that you have to understand, that you can go ahead and look for locations, but they have to approve that location in order for you to be able to operate. But also most franchise agreements tells you in how many days you need to begin to operate. So you're basically a race against the clock. You pay the franchise fee. Say they give you 6 months, for example, that you want to, you need to open. In some cases, that may or may not be adequate time for you to basically open. But then you have to find a location to operate. You got to find a lease agreement, and most likely have to do a build out. So there are a lot of challenges that you will face along the way. So to the extent that you can do that before you commit to the franchise, you're better off. In some cases, you might not be able to, and that's where the negotiation comes in. The franchise is not exclusive to you, meaning that other than the protected territory, the franchisor can obviously offer other franchises. So that's not a problem. Once you purchase a franchise, and just say you have, in this particular case, a restaurant, you're going to be required to have their identification. You're required to use their trade dress. So it's a specific decor that you'll be required to have. So it could be, you most likely will need a build out, but also be the color of the tables, the chairs, decorations that go along with it. All that you'll have to purchase from the franchisor. So you need to basically be clear in what type of investment you need to make in order to, get this restaurant up and running. But the franchise agreement will tell you you have to use their particular pictures, trade dress. They'll inspect that. You cannot just basically put any pictures you want on your restaurant unless it's approved by the franchisor. Another important term is the term of the franchise. You have a license to operate a franchise. Could be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. It depends. So you have to understand the type of contract you're entering into and how long you will have that. So if it's a 10-year contract, which is a very, very long commitment that you're making, your lease agreement needs to, for the most part, correspond to the number of years of the franchise. But at the very least, if it's a 5-year lease with a 5-year option to renew, it has to correspond. You cannot have a 10-year franchise and then have a 5-year lease with no option to renew, because then what are you going to do in year 6 if you have no place to operate after you invested 5 years of your life basically building this franchise in this location? Then you got to move out. So the franchise agreement and the lease agreement should be concurrent. And the way most franchises operate, they seem to be kind of separate. You also require, once you go into the franchise agreement will tell you that you have to maintain certain standards of operation. That means cleanliness. That means the way the chairs are. That means basically the equipment. And they will inspect periodically to make sure that you comply with those standards. And again, it's good business management to do that. And what the franchise agreement is basically telling you, we're going to have this system, and you have to follow it. And if you deviate, we're going to give you, there's some penalties along with it. Understand what happens once you go into the franchise and something is not up to their standards, and what penalties are associated with it. That's in the franchise agreement, and an attorney can help you analyze those documents. From time to time, and again, it's not very uncommon, a franchisor wants to change their decor. They change their logo, they change their colors, they might change something along the way in how they operate. And if they make those changes, you're going to be required to pay for those changes in your restaurant and your business. And that's part of the franchise agreement, that they want uniformity. So it's a, listen, in 5 years from now, you make changes, how much time do I have to bring everything to compliance? So you have to understand that as well. And most likely in a 10-year franchise, it is very likely you'll be required to make some changes along the way. And in fact, upgrade your equipment, upgrade your tables, upgrade your furniture to maintain that same level of experience for the customer and also for the franchise standards. Maintenance goes along the way that you're required to do that. I want to talk about something else that I think that might be important to you. Okay. The operation standards and that you have to maintain. And we're using the restaurant example. We go out so we can relate to restaurants, and we've been to restaurant franchises as well. You will only be able to use their authorized menu. You're not going to be able to deviate from that menu, any recipes. You have to sell what they sell, period. But also, you can only use their approved vendors and suppliers and their approved recipes. So you cannot go ahead and say, I want to try this other recipe. I want to basically go to the store and try to add, some condiments. No, you have to use what they sell you, and you have to use their suppliers pretty much for paper, for cups, for everything they sell, everything you're going to be offering in the franchise. You have to use their suppliers. You cannot deviate from that. If you do, that's a violation of the franchise agreement, and you can have penalties for that. And that's part of the franchise agreement as well. You have to purchase, for the most part, their computer system. Give me a second. Some water here. Excuse me. You'll have to basically purchase their computer system. Everything then the franchise, they will have access to everything. So When you have their computer system they purchase, they program it for you through their supplier. They'll have access to everything in that franchise. They'll have access to your sales. They'll have access to your expenses. They'll have access to all the credit card charges. Everything that goes into the franchise, they'll have access to, and that's part of the way they know how much money you're making to collect the royalties. So again, that's part of the franchise agreement as well. Hours of operation. They require you to operate a certain number of hours per week, and you have to be open it for, whether it's a 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. to midnight, whatever the time it is for the restaurant. You have to maintain the same hour of operations. You cannot decide when to close it, when to open it. It is strictly required in the franchise agreement, and this is something that will be in the franchise agreement. And many people don't realize, okay, there's only two of us. What happens when I go on vacation? But you have to plan for that. And what I tell my clients when they're looking at franchises, you have to do a business plan. You have to go ahead and you got to map this out and say how this is going to work in real life. And you look at the financial aspect of it, we talked about before, the capital requirements to open a business and a franchise, and they give you that in the table in the FDD, the low and highs in terms of the potential investment that you have to make. But also, you have to kind of simulate, if I'm going to open this franchise, say I go through all the scenarios, I'm going to be opening, 7 days a week, 6 days a week. Okay, who's going to be covering for me? Somebody's sick. How many employees do I need? You need to take that into consideration if you're planning to take some time off. You cannot just say, I'm going to close the franchise for a week because I want to go on a cruise. It does not work that way. Not when you sign a franchise agreement, they require you to be open a certain number of days per week. So you have to look at that as well. And many people do not look at that. And that is unfortunate. They find out the hard way that, listen, I did not read it. I did not know it. It is there. And unfortunately, many business owners, which is a mistake that it is very common, do not read the contracts, do not read the franchise agreements, do not understand them, they sign them because they believe what the salesperson tells them. Again, they're not doing anything wrong. Their job is to sell a franchise. So your job is to be diligent and do the proper due diligence and ask proper questions. And the reason I'm doing this today and throughout this podcast is to be able to equip you to ask better questions. You're not going to be an expert at this, but at the very minimum, if I raise awareness to some of the topics that you need to be aware of, I've done what I'm trying to accomplish here. It goes without saying, you got to comply with the local laws, regulations. That's part of the franchise agreement. If you do not, that's a violation. And again, they give you, for the most part, a notice to cure. If you don't, they can actually terminate your franchise. So you got to read all that. Another important component that I want to make you aware of is whether or not you need to know whether or not you can use social media, whether or not you can have your own website, how you can use social media to promote your franchise business, especially in a local area. And the franchise agreement will give you specific requirements, how you can use it and how you can't use it. So you cannot just go ahead and call your web developer and say, hey, listen, I want you to create a website for my franchise. Here's the logo. Here's my business. And create something for me. You cannot do that. In some cases, franchisors will say, okay, you can have a listing on our national website for your restaurant. And they'll give you a specific requirement. Well, they'll create it for you. They'll charge you a fee, but you can only have it there. You got to find out whether or not you can be in Yelp, whether you can have a Google My Business page. So understanding that is very important because if you have a local business that depends on that a way you're going to promote it to social media, you need to understand what you can and cannot do. So that discussion needs to be had, but at the same time, when you talk to them, find out, but also when you have to look at the franchise agreement, which a sample of their contract will be included at the FDD. So there's not a surprise here in terms of what you can and cannot do. And they'll tell you if you want to do something different, ask us first. Maybe they'll agree to it, maybe not, but everybody's different. So I just want to give you more concepts versus tell you that, yes, you will be able to do it or not. A franchise, you're going to most likely be required to have ongoing training. And training is at your expense. Not only the training that is done, meaning that you have to travel to somewhere, to the headquarters of the company, but you have to pay for that. So there's training for the most part when you begin the franchise, but as you continue your journey with this franchisor, you're going to be required to attend some training sessions spelled out in the franchise agreement, and how often you have to do it, whether it's once a year, once a quarter, they'll tell you that. There's also staffing requirements. You need to find out, okay, in order for me to operate this franchise, what is the minimum staffing requirement that I need to have in order to operate? They'll tell you, okay, you need, for this franchise to begin, you might need a manager, you need like 2 staff members or 1 employee. You got to find that out. So that way you can do your performance, your projections, and find out, okay, this is the budget requirements that I need to begin to operate to get the franchise started. Advertising fund already discussed. And some franchise, you're required to spend a minimum amount of your gross sales in advertising. In some cases, could be 1%, 0.5%, or 3%. It depends. So understand that, and you have to include that as part of your expenditures. So, and again, these concepts are for you to understand, okay, how much money do I have to spend, what is going to be required, because they're going to look at that and say, how much money you spend in advertising, because that's part of their franchise system. If you don't advertise your business, how are people going to learn about you? So it said you got to spend a certain amount of money every single month to advertise. Your royalty payments will be in the franchise agreement. How they're going to collect that payment is also in the franchise agreement. And I will tell you that they're going to require you, for the most part, to give them your bank account number. You give them an ACH form for you to sign an authorization that you authorize them to collect their royalties directly from your checking account at a certain interval the following month for the prior month. So it's not that they're going to send you a bill and say, okay, here's $1,000 for royalties. No, they're going to take it out right from your checking account through ACH. So you have to understand that, because that's before you pay any expenses, they're going to get paid first. So that's part of your franchise agreement. What happens if by any chance that account is not working or something wrong? There's late charges associated with those royalty payments. In some cases, could be as high as 18% per year. So it can accumulate. Another component of the franchise agreement is that they require you to make sure you pay your bills on time, your vendor bills, your obligations to obviously your payroll, anything that you do in that franchise that is not in compliance with proper business management, that could be a violation of the franchise agreement. So I need you to understand that that is here. So if you're getting overwhelmed, I get it. It is a long document. It is an important document. And every aspect of this franchise agreement is important. So that's why if you're looking at one of these, my suggestion, if you're about to spend, $300,000 on a franchise, my suggestion is to make sure you have the proper legal and financial advice to really guide you through this purchase. It's a very important decision, probably one of the most important business decisions you're going to make in buying a business, buying a franchise. Just don't go at it alone. It's just too important. And I know the subject sometimes a little dry, and I get it, but it is important to understand what you're signing. And if you recall, my prior episodes, my ruling contracts, if you do not understand the contract, do not sign it. It's that simple. Just get the advice, get somebody to interpret it for you, help you, ask you your questions. I mean, they're in English, but they're written by attorneys. So if you have not seen this document before, it's the first time you see it, you're not going to understand it for the most part. So have somebody help you along the way. The franchise agreement also talks about insurance requirements. You're going to require to purchase insurance. Their business insurance you're going to require to purchase. There's workers' comp insurance as well. Understand that. What I usually recommend my clients is that take that portion of the franchise agreement, send it to an insurance broker, and to give you kind of a quote on how much you'll have to spend. Before I close this section, I want you to point out to you when the franchise can be terminated. In most franchise agreements that I've seen, there are a lot of recent ways that a franchisor can terminate the franchise if you violate the franchise agreement. There are very few ways that you can terminate the franchise. So I need you to understand that. Said, how can I terminate it? It's very difficult to do that. I mean, obviously, you want to just break the agreement. You can terminate it, but there are consequences to that. I usually recommend clients that are looking to get out of a franchise, see if it's possible to sell it. So that way it's a transfer, not necessarily a breach. And there might be ways to do it, but I want you to understand that before you're going in. Okay, what happens if things go wrong? How can I get out of this? Read that, okay? The last thing I want you to talk about is basically the dispute resolution and the franchise agreement. What happens if I have an issue with the franchisor and we have a legal problem? Okay, well, I need to sue the franchisor because they basically did not protect my territory. They sold the territory to another franchise which is within 2 miles or maybe half a mile within my protected area. So how you're going to address that is very important. And most franchise agreements that I've seen, they call for arbitration. And arbitration is, and I talked about that before, it's kind of a private judge in a sense. And they say that means that you're not going to be able to file anything in court. You have to go through the arbitration process, whether it's the American Arbitration Association or JAMS. You have to go through that process. And in most cases, I've seen that. In some cases, you can go to your local courthouse, circuit court, or you can go to federal court. But understand how, if there things go wrong in the franchise agreement, in the relationship between you and the franchisor, what are your options to resolve that dispute if you don't negotiate a potential settlement or potential agreement beforehand with the franchisor. In some cases, you got to go to the jurisdiction wherever they're located at, which could be out of your state. Again, the goal here is for you to understand, I already know that, I read it, I'm clear with that. Before I leave, just want to share with you that, again, purchasing a franchise, there are many successful franchises. It's a good way to go into business. The key here is you have to understand why you're doing it, understand how you're doing it, and the resources that are required to go into it, and understand the obligations that you have as a franchisee. So that's basically my goal with the franchise series, is to give you additional tools that I believe will be helpful to you in analyzing whether or not you want to go into franchise or want to go into a business. But in this particular case, it's a franchise, so that way you can go ahead and have better tools at your disposal. If you have any questions about this topic, please send me an email at rich@richsierra.com. And again, if you have a legal question as well, last time I put some things in the show notes. I actually put the link that I used for the FDD handout from the FTC. So you can download it right there, just in the podcast channel. So if you want to reach me again, it's rich@richsierra.com. If you want to learn about our legal services, you can find us at floridasmallbusinesslegalcenter.com. You can find us on Facebook at FSB Legal. If you want to watch the video of this podcast, we're at youtube.com/at Richard Sierra. We have an Instagram channel. That's also at FSB Legal. If you want to call our office, we're 866-842-5202. Remember the Business SOS, 8 common legal mistakes business owners make and how to avoid them. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Or you can ask for it at your local bookstores. If you like the podcast, I appreciate it if you follow us. Give us a review. And share it with your friends. We're available in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy your shows. Until next week, this is Rich Sierra with the Florida Small Business Legal Center. Remember that my goal is to help you succeed.